His occupation?
Actually, he had two jobs most of the time growing up. His main job was a postal carrier in Salamanca. He delivered the mail for 37 years, I think, was the final total. But when we were younger, when I say younger, probably, between the ages of 6 and 10 or 12, he also painted houses after work, he and the guy next door. So he was pretty busy most of the time. And then, of course, as we grew older and he started following us athletically, he pretty much got rid of the painting job except for weekends. And then, but yeah, he even had there was a local restaurant, I will say, that he used to stop in there all the time around lunchtime. And so the day he retired, they gave him his stool that he always used to sit on.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Fantastic. Was he into athletics? Was he a very...
What's funny you mention that, because as I was going through some old clippings and things, I just found something in which I call my men's room, or my memorabilia area, and it's actually it's an ad for Firestone company in Salamanca. Mm-hmm. And it says, "Congratulations to our softball champions." And of course, my dad's listed there, and this is 1948.
Okay.
And there was an article with it, pretty much just in softball. He didn't speak anything about high school or anything, because he was young and he went right into the service after high school. So my uncles, however, my mom's side, I think that's where a lot of it comes from. Two of the three uncles, or my mom's brothers, were professional baseball players in the minor leagues. Wow. And Uncle Ed, who was the oldest, he was quite a golfer in his day. So,
right. Did your mother, she was a home care?
Yes.
Yeah.
My mom was a great bowler. At one time, she was averaging close to 200, and that was way back in the times when you didn't take the ball out of the bag and it went into the pocket, And for the last, I want to say 15 years that she bowled, she was legally blind. And my dad used to go, and the teammates used to go and line her up and say, "This is what you got left." And she maintained about a 160 average, even though she couldn't see.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
must have great form. Salamanca's always been home for you guys?
Yes. Yep.
Why there? I mean, it's... were you on the reservation where you lived?
Yes. My grandfather, my mom's father, grew up, and he at one time had a bowling alley and a bar downtown. Mm-hmm. And then he got a job in Rochester for Kodak. And Mom and Dad got married, and they lived about 3 months before Grandpa got the job in Kodak. And so my grandfather, gave the house to my mother to live in. And other than 3 months, my mom lived in the same house for 88 years. So we were always, Salamanca people, and it's quite a story about when we talk about siblings. I married Patty, who just grew up around the corner from us. My brother married Debbie, who lives further up around the corner. And my other brother, Dick, married Julie, who lived across the street from Debbie. So we kind of kept it in the neighborhood.
I would say so. Well, must have had some good neighborhood picnics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Salamanca, tell me about it. Because again, I'm from Jamestown, driving through Salamanca, knowing it's an Indian reservation. From a real estate perspective, you never really could own title. You had to have a lease. Mm-hmm. And was there much? What was it like? I mean, you have sort of two different cultures merging there in Salamanca.
Well, I have to be honest with you. When I was growing up, or when we were growing up as kids, we didn't see much of that. I mean, we went to school with the Native American kids, and there was never this divide. We were always just kids with kids. No matter what teams, we were more neighborhoods than we were anything. So if you go back to the Bowery Boys or the East Side, that was more or less what when we were growing up. It wasn't until the early 90s when the lease actually expired that all of this came to fruition, and then the natives started getting paid. Of course, then the casinos came and the more money that they had. So right now, yeah, it's still a little tentative, but when I was growing up, we had a Native American friend of ours, Earl Krause, lived right in the backyard, so to speak, and Lee, the other Native American friend, he lived on the corner. So we didn't look at it that way, as there was a division. And even in high school, there was, in the old high school, which only had 2 wings at the time, we had 174 my graduating class, and now there's 75 maybe, and we never looked at it as a problem.
Yeah. Joe San Filippo always credited you as probably the best athlete he ever coached. Joe started in, I guess, Salamanca in 1957, a long time ago. So he would have been obviously your coach. Tell me a little bit about him as an individual.
Well, he came into Salamanca. I believe he coached a year in New Mexico before he moved his family back here. And there's really not one word that describes him. He came back here, and he was obviously a disciplinarian. And at that time, the Salamanca program was pretty weak, and there wasn't much discipline. And I think he might have even gone 0-8 his first year, second year. And then the Nugent family came along, and he immediately turned that around into 6-1 and 7-1 and 8-0. But he was a community-minded person. He just wasn't the high school football coach. He was in the community all the time. When we were growing up as kids with the Killbuck Panthers, he'd come to practice, just show up and, sort of give his 2 cents, which was always wanted, or at least he thought so. But he was just, I would say, if you talk to 98% of the people that ever run across him, was somebody that they looked up to and taught discipline and a lot more than just athletics. We talk about it. My friends and I, who are still around, talk about when we used to practice and it get dark and we'd push around this old wooden sled, and we couldn't understand it because, what's this got to do with football? It really didn't have anything to do with football as much as camaraderie, teamwork, making sure you weren't the person that was holding everything up. And he instilled a lot of that on the way up. And I remember, it would have been 1964. In those days, you had to be 14 to participate in high school athletics. And I was still only 13. So I played another year with the Killbuck Panthers, the Pee Wee team, or the Pony League. And my first introduction to him really was, he came into the huddle. He was refereeing the game. He came into the huddle and he goes, you're the little runt I'm supposed to be counting on for the next 3 years? I wore a size 11 different places at times, and he never treated anybody differently as far as no matter who you are or what position you played. Every drill, you participated in every drill, and he and Louis Foy made a great team back then.
Joe said that Chuck Crist, Chucky Crist, was in a class by yourself. Now I realize how humility will cause you to pause here, but why would he say that? What was your successes and what were your attributes that would lead Joe to kind of determine that? You don't need to be shy.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with self-discipline on my part, but also the want. When I tell the story to people about when I was in first grade, the nuns would line us up by height, and I was always second in line. The only person was Candy Kyler. She was the only one shorter than me until we got to, even in 8th grade, I think it was still only 4th on the list. But a lot of it had to do, I basically grew up in a small man's world. I was very tiny when I was growing up. When I was in 8th grade, I was probably just under 5 feet. And people would always ask me, they'd say, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I want to be a professional athlete. They, of course, I'm 4'11", they laughed. But I was working on everything. That's the one thing about when we were growing up, I might digress a little bit, is all of our neighborhoods, no matter what the season, if it was fall, we played football. If it was winter, we played basketball. And of course, we were fortunate that my dad had an old barn, and so he put a hoop up above him. So that was fun for all of us. And then in the spring, we played track, summertime baseball. So we went pretty much year-round athletically. And a lot of times, because I was the small one, I didn't get picked on the teams or whatever. And not there. So a lot of times I spent by myself, hitting a little wiffle ball towards the house or throwing a tennis ball against the side of the house or shooting baskets. But when I was in 8th grade, they laughed. And then sophomore, they'd ask the same thing. I was 5'3", and I'd say the same thing. And then when I was a senior, I was like 6 foot, maybe 6'1", weighed 160 pounds. And they'd ask again, and they'd still laugh. And then I came back from my freshman year in college at Penn State, and I was 6'2", and weighed 220, and they stopped laughing.
Yeah.
But Joe they were so supportive. He and Louie and Pat Carroll, and I even credit my grammar school basketball coach. This was a 19-year-old kid who was going to St. Bonaventure. He played on the freshman team there. And but he gave up all his time for us as kids. We practiced Monday through Friday from 6 to 9. And then he would come down Saturdays and put the St. Bonaventure game on the radio, and we'd play throughout the game, and then we played games on Sunday afternoon. So there was just, a different world about space that we could use and people that dedicated their time. My first grammar school basketball coach literally put in to work third trick on the railroad so he could coach us during the nighttime. So that was, there's some just fabulous people. Why Joe said that, I don't know. I guess my background in success speaks for itself. There's not too many people that can claim that they didn't play a sport in college and yet went to the pros. And so I appreciated everything he always did for me because he treated me just like any other kid.
When you got, you played every sport. I mean, it's just, I'm identifying with everything you said for myself because of size and the fact you played basketball when it was basketball, you played football when it was football, and you were trial for track and all those things. And of course, everything you did incredibly well and set records, etc. When it came time for you to graduate from Salamanca, why Penn State?
It was actually the first visit that I made. They were probably the most aggressive in the recruiting process. And I recall right before I signed letter to go there, the J.T. White was the person that was recruiting me, and he came to one of our, I think it was a semifinal basketball game, and I got in foul trouble for whatever reason, and I was out of the game.
Bad refs.
Well, it pretty much was. So, but anyway, I got in foul trouble and I didn't play most of the first half, and then I got my quick foul early in the third quarter, and then as soon as they put me back in, I was out and I was gone. After the game, he came up to me and I said, "Geez, I'm sorry I didn't play so well." And he goes, "No." He said, "Everything that you did on that bench is what I wanted to see." Because I never stopped cheering for my teammates. Penn State was just, when I went there, I was looking for a bigger place to go. I mean, growing up in Salamanca, it was fun, but it wasn't easy because everybody knew your business, everybody knew who you were. You couldn't, thank goodness there wasn't all the phones and cameras and things back then. Not that I did anything too wrong, but it was a nice place to grow up, but I wanted something bigger. I wanted to get into a bigger world. And it was, Penn State, if you've ever been there, is a campus within the town. And just a beautiful place. And I moved from 6,000 people to 28,000, and those were just the students. And I don't know, there was just something about the place that it was far enough away from home, but not too far. And I really enjoyed my visit there.
When you went to finally decided to go to Penn State, Paterno was the coach.
Correct.
Then, was there how much pressure was there for you to decide football versus basketball?
Well, the one thing I always said was, well, even J.T. White, who was the guy that recruited me, along with, I'm going to forget his name, Trevor, the athletic director. They basically recruited me with the idea as an athlete, so to speak, said, "We want you to play both sports your freshman year," because freshmen weren't eligible at that time to play, and then you can make a choice. So I said, well, the only thing that I really want, I said, because people were always picking on me about being an outside tackle in San Filippo's offense more than a quarterback. I said, I just want a chance to play quarterback and, prove to myself and prove to people that I could play there. Mm-hmm. And so when I got down to summer camp, I went in to get my equipment, and the guy says, "What's the name?" And I said, "Crist." And I said, "Quarterback." So he gets out his sheet and he looks down and he goes, "Well, there's 16 of them here and you're not one of them." And he goes, "Of course, a lot of these guys are going to go elsewhere and play tight ends and linebacker and Coach Paterno." Oh, wait a minute. He flips the page over and he goes, "Oh, there you are, defensive back." And I said, "No, that wasn't the agreement." I mean, pretty brash for a 17-year-old, but I said, that wasn't the agreement. I just want a chance. And so we had some words back and forth with the equipment manager, and I finally said, I need to see Coach Paterno. So had a meeting set up. I went into his office, and of course JT was there, and he goes, "Chuck, I just think that, with all the people we recruited at quarterback, we really feel you'd be a better defensive back, even right now." And I said, "But that's not what you promised. You said you'd give me a chance." And he goes, "Well, we really think you're a defensive back." And I said, "Well, I'm a quarterback." And he looked at me again and a little more sternly, he said, "No, we feel you're going to be a defensive back." And I said, "No, I'm going to be a basketball player." I said, "I have the option. I'm choosing it." I got my stuff, got up, walked out, never went back. But they didn't put a lot of pressure on me. I mean, the assistant coaches sort of understood. And then especially when I was a freshman, John Bach became the coach my freshman year in the basketball program. And at the tail end of my senior year, he kind of sent me a couple letters, but I never really met him until I got on campus. And so the freshman basketball coach used to say, "Hey, give me those 4 scholarship kids and that other kid." And I was the other kid. So, but I think once probably halfway through my sophomore year, I started to play a little more. And then I think that the tables turned that, they really saw, he's not a bad basketball player. So they never really put any pressure. They jokingly, if I'd see one or have one for class, they'd say, hey, when are you coming out for football? And I said, well, I'm already on the intramural team, so I'm fine.
Now, back to high school, you play quarterback, and what did you play? Did you play defense as well?
I played safety. I mean, obviously looking back, they were right all along, but I still credit, again, going all the way back to my grammar school days, and of course Pat Carroll, who was my high school basketball coach. We used to press all the time, and I was the guy that was way back, even though I was so small. But that's where I sort of learned to go to the ball, and when we pressed and they throw that long pass, it was my job to get it, or at least shut it down. And so I think my basketball skills really helped, because I always was taught, go to the ball, and do everything that you possibly can to be better, even though I was small.
Yeah.
So
you were MVP your senior year at Penn State. What kind of team did you have?
Well, my sophomore year we weren't very good, and then my junior year we were somewhat better. And our senior year, we had a key loss to Pittsburgh in the beginning of February. I'm pretty sure our record was like 17-8, but that loss to Pittsburgh cost us an NIT bid. But we had some, I'd say, some better than average players. A sophomore kid that from Pittsburgh who ended up leading us in scoring, Ronnie Brown. We had some good players, but not great. But we played as a team, and I still remain close friends with Barry Parkhill, who grew up in State College. And we begged Coach Bach, said, you got to recruit this kid. I mean, he's 6'4". He's a tweener. He's not really a forward, and he's not a guard. And I said, but you don't see him that we see him over at Rec Hall at nights. I said, he can play. He goes, no. He says, I don't think we're interested in getting involved in that. Well, he went to University of Virginia, was two-time ACC Player of the Year, and we played him. Barry was a junior in my senior year, and we played them at Rec Hall and State College, and they were fourth in the country.
Wow. And
we upset them. And I still have the ball in the net.
You do, really?
Yeah.
So you graduated from Penn State with being an MVP of the basketball team. What did the Giants see in you, or what's the next transition for all of a sudden you go from not playing college football at all to being signed as a free agent? How did that work?
Well, that actually was due to the basketball coach more than it was the football coaches, although a couple of the coaches that were still there, the defensive backfield coach in particular, and my Dan Radakovich, Bad Rad they used to call him, even though he had left previous to that, he just said, someday I really still think you might have an opportunity. So some of the football coaches had contacted some people in the NFL, New England, and I got a couple of letters from the Cowboys. And so I ran into Coach Bach one day at Rec Hall, and he goes, wait a minute. He says, what's this I hear about you being interested? And I said, the coaches came to me. I said, they still think there's a possibility, and what have you got to lose? And he goes, well, let me make a phone call for you, because he was at Fordham for 18 years before he came to Penn State. So he made a call to Wellington Mara, the owner, and pretty much told him the story. He said, we got a kid here that some people are saying, he's got the ability. And so Giants called me, Jim Garrett, whose son is the head coach of the Cowboys right now.
Mm-hmm.
Jim called me on the phone. We set up a free agent tryout right in the Yankee Stadium, and I credit Jim and John Bach for that opportunity because Jim goes, you got a lot of ability. I just don't know where you're going to play. And so my rookie year, I was pretty much a special teams kid. I mean, I went to camp. I didn't know my helmet size. I didn't know half the drills. I didn't know what to do. And so I had a job offer in Olean as a phys ed teacher. And at that time in particular, the coaches would have been George Witcher, myself, and Matt Connie, which would have been, but anyway, I went to camp and there was 22 defensive backs, I think, their first year. Obviously, I didn't know what I was doing, but Jim would spend extra time with me and work on me with the X and O's. And I just busted my butt on special teams and wasn't afraid to make a tackle. I have a great story about Franco Harris that, anyway, halfway through the training camp, I went into Emlyn Tiddell, who was the defensive backfield coach. And I said, Emlyn, what do you think? And he goes, to be honest with you, kid, he goes, you haven't got a chance. But he goes, he says, I've been around this game for 30 years. And he goes, you never know. Things happen. And he goes, do you really have anything else to do right now? And I explained the job, and he goes, are you ever going to get another chance to be where you're at right now? And I said, no. And he goes, then what have you got to lose? So you get another job somewhere else. So I stuck it out, and within a couple days, a couple guys got hurt. They traded another defensive back, and lo and behold, there I was, rookie year. I was on the roster, and the first preseason game, we played against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. And so I was on the kickoff team right next to the kicker, which wasn't a pleasant experience, but so they kicked off, and Franco Harris was returning the kick. So he kind of cut to the left. I had a great angle on him, and I stuck him really hard. And he goes, I heard him grunt, and he goes, oh, like that. And he turns around, and he goes, Chuck, he goes, take it easy. This is the preseason. I said, yeah, but you already got a job. I need one. But years gone past, one of my son's friends lives in State College, and Franco Harris was there for one of the charity functions, and he had Jim Vallette introduced himself to him, and he goes, I got a story to tell you about Chuck Crist. And so he had like 40 people around telling him the story about the hardest hit he ever got was from a basketball player. So that was kind of nice for my ego.
Oh, fantastic. I got to ask one quick question on Penn State. Was a guy named John Chuckrin, he was recruited from Allegheny. He was my football coach at Allegheny for 1 year, then went to Penn State, and he worked under Paterno as sort of the director of education to make sure kids got through. Does that ring a bell at all?
It doesn't, but that doesn't mean he wasn't there. Right. I mean, again, there was a huge staff. And
just a curiosity.
Yeah, I will tell you this, though. The thing that aggravates me the most about Penn State is the assistant basketball coach, Casper Voigthofer, was also, we were in phys ed classes, and I had to take basketball coaching from him. And I missed one class too many, and he gave me, here I'm on the basketball team. We got home from Philadelphia about 2:30 in the morning, so I didn't go to basketball class. He gave me a B. I said, I'm not that bad. Come on, one class.
I know, that's usually your duck course. Exactly.
Yeah.
So during that Giants 72 season, your head coach was Alex Red Webster.
Alex Webster.
Yeah. What was he like?
Well, the Giants were very loyal and have still been loyal to this day to people that have played for them or were around in the heyday. Alex was a character. Boy, I'll tell you, I mean, here I am a rookie, and we had our training camp at Monmouth College down in New Jersey. Well, come to find out that Alex had a bar. He owned a bar about 10 minutes from Seegert. Seegert was like 10 minutes away. So he convinced the Mara family to have the training camp down in Monmouth. And so, lo and behold, after one of the meetings, Pat Hughes, Donnie Herman, we all went out just to have a beer. And of course, one beer led to 2 beers, led to 3 beers, and it's like 11:45, and curfew's at 11. So we all got up to leave, and Alex was at the bar. We didn't see him. He came over and put his arm around Dick Enderle, the offensive guard, and he goes, "Where are you guys going?" And Plummer said, "Well, we got to get back. Curfew at 11. He goes, "Nah, hang out. We're not checking tonight." But that's the kind of guy he was. He very laid back, very loose. Was really not good at, I shouldn't say that. He knew the game, but he didn't know the X and O's as well as most NFL coaches. So he relied on Joe Morrison and Jim Garrett and other people to run the X and O part. And there was another story my rookie year. We were down in St. Louis, and it was freezing rain. It was terrible. And the score was 10-10 late in the game. And so Alex calls timeout, and Norm Snead comes over. Of course, Alex got a cigarette down by the side. And he comes over and he says to Joe, he says, "Well, what are you going to call?" Joe goes, "I don't know, Alex. What do you think?" And he goes, Alex just scratched himself and he goes, "This is a hell of a game." He goes, "Norm, you got any ideas?" And he goes, "Yeah, one." He goes, "Well, it better work." And he took a puff of his cigarette and walked away. And we got a first down. We ended up winning the game, but that's Alex. And played in a golf tournament with him one time, and I won a bottle of scotch for long drive or closest to the line, I don't know. And so after the banquet, I won it, and I said, I guess I won a bottle of scotch. He goes, "Well, you did." And I said, "Well, can I pick it up?" He goes, "No, Coach Webster already picked it up for you." I never saw it. But they were fun times, particularly my rookie year. I didn't know anything or anybody, but the nice thing that sort of indoctrinated me to the league a little bit was we had 48 guys on the roster at the time, and 40 of them would dress, and the other 8 were on the taxi squad. And yet we'd have little parties after games in New York City. We'd go to Gallagher's or someplace, and out of 48 guys, 46 would show up, and the other 2 didn't come because they were hurt or couldn't. I mean, we had such a close-knit bunch of guys, African Americans, people from the South. I mean, Ronnie Hornsby was a good friend of mine, and he was from Southeast Louisiana, and he and his wife thought that New York was 5 hours up the road from Hammond, Louisiana. But we had a great time, met a lot of nice people, and I can't tell you that if any year that was the one that I probably had the most fun and learned the most.
73, again, you were there, 72, 73, 74, so 3 years. Webster was coach the next year, wasn't he?
He was 72, 73, and then they brought in the little Hitler that I called him, Bill Arnsparker. Came in. And he had some different ideas, but he also, that was the year of the union strike, and those of us that didn't cross the union picket line got treated like dirt. And he made no bones about that he wasn't happy. So I got to get through that year. And then I was a starter in training camp in 75, and I don't know, within 3 weeks, I was a starter, and the next thing you know, he calls me in his office, says, "We're gonna let you go." And that was pretty much all he said. We're going to let you go. So,
Now, did you have a chance to start in 73 or 74 too?
yeah, I started a little bit in 72. I actually, first game of the season, we were playing the Lions. And at that time, because our other roster needs, we really only had 6 defensive backs. And one guy was a corner, and I was the other safety. Well, Spider Lockhart got hurt on the very first play from scrimmage. So Jim Garrett grabs me and says, "You're in." I said, "What am I supposed to do?" And he goes, "Just stay deep so they can't see that blue face." But I started a couple games early in 73, then a lot more, and then all of a sudden I found myself on the bench again. And then 75 I came back and I was number 1 on the chart, but evidently it wasn't good enough. And
I was curious, I noticed that a lot of your games in 73 and 74 were in the Yale Bowl. Was there construction going on at Yankee Stadium? Was that?
yeah, and I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but if they can tear down Yankee Stadium, they can tear down the thing at Chautauqua Institution. No, they had planned that after the 72 season, they were going to remodel and refurbish Yankee Stadium. So it was actually closer for some of us to drive to Philadelphia to home games than it was to the Yale Bowl. Yeah. I mean, it was 5.5 hours from where we lived in New Jersey. But it was a fun time, but it was, it snowed a couple games and there was no protecting yourself from the fans. Yeah. I wouldn't say the Yale Bowl was the best thing that happened to us. And the other side of that was we were practicing down in New Jersey, and they'd have rock concerts on the practice field, and there was broken glass, and that wasn't very much fun.
Well, those couple of years were kind of lean years for the Giants. What was the sense of humor with the Maras, Tim and Wellington? Did they interject themselves much?
Wellington did a little bit. Never saw too much of Tim, but Wellington was pretty much hands-on. He was at all training camp. He was there every day. He used to go do his exercises and jog, but he was also sort of a player's owner. In fact, you'd see him in the locker room, or he'd come, and his son now, who owns the team, or John Mara, was one of the ball boys, and but he'd come around and say hello, try to make sure everybody felt comfortable. Yeah. But it was some lean years. But 74 under Arnsparger wasn't much fun for anyone, I don't think.
Did you find that during that time period, Giants players, teammates of yours, any sort of characters when you get to a reunion and you guys sit down and you talk about those 3 years of the Giants, and you guys say, "Well, do you remember so and so? Do you believe him? He was unbelievable."
Oh yeah, we had some characters. A lot of the stories I can't tell, but Dick Enderle was one of the guys. We used to call him Plumber because he looked like the plumber on one of the TV commercials. And we'd play Dallas, and he'd go to practice on Thursday because it was offensive day, and then he wouldn't come out of his room until Sunday morning of the game. He wouldn't shave. He'd sit in there drinking some beer and getting himself, mentally ready to play. He was something else. And then Jack Gregory was defensive end. He came from Cleveland, and Jack was kind of a hound. And we were in Dallas last game of the season. I think it must have been 73. And they intercepted or recovered a fumble and ran it down inside the 5. So as a defense, we're coming on the field. Jack looks over and he goes, "Timeout, timeout." And I said, "What are you doing calling timeout? There's only like 30 seconds left and they don't have it." And he goes, "Cheerleaders aren't down here yet." I mean, we had some comical moments. Yeah. And the plumber was was probably the biggest character. He bet somebody that he could drink a case of beer on the plane from St. Louis to New York. And so as we took off, he drank 23 beers in an hour and 17 minutes.
My gosh.
But those were the old days. I mean, guys, some of the old timers smoking in a locker room. It was different, but it was more friendly. It was more together. And I got my first taste of that when I went to New Orleans, and the fact that there was only when I first got there was only two white defensive backs, myself and Tommy Myers. Mm-hmm. And I was used to New York. I was used to, after the games you go out. And Maurice Spencer turned in to be one of my best friends. And so after one game, I said, Maurice, what are you going to do? You want to go out and have something to drink or eat? And he goes, son, where the hell do you think you are? And I said, what? He goes, we're in New Orleans now. He goes, you can go places I can't go, and I can go places you sure as hell don't want to go. So I got my first taste of racism, so to speak, and that was a learning experience in itself. I mean, we walk into some of the bars and it have a picture of the Saints, and 23 whites and 21, one very nice slang. So,
did that pervade with the team itself? Did you see that in the locker room where the blacks would stay with the blacks, the whites with the whites, as just part of a cultural thing within the Saints?
In New Orleans, it was very obvious and very definite, but again, it was Southern. Mm-hmm. And so I learned quickly, and so it wasn't like in the locker room or during the games or practice that we wouldn't communicate or talk to each other. That wasn't the case at all. But once you left the locker room, it was tough for them and tough for us. We didn't know, especially us northern guys, we didn't know that there was such a rule that you couldn't. I mean, Maurice, he got arrested Sunday after game. They threw him. Nobody knew where he was till Thursday. So it was hard overall for the team, but still a lot of fun. There were more characters in New Orleans. There wasn't.
Is that right?
Oh yeah.
Was Kilmer your quarterback then?
No, Archie Manning.
Archie Manning. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, talk about him. Mississippi
Archie
Rebel.
was a great guy. At that time, I didn't realize the historic things that he had done at Ole Miss and the things that he had put up with on his way up through. I really had a lot of respect and admiration for him, because if he had been, in my opinion, and probably a lot of other people, with a better team, say if he would have been with the Vikings at the time, he was really unbelievable and tough. I mean, one game he broke his jaw in the first quarter, played the rest of the game, and then they took him to the hospital and reset his jaw. But he was really never, again, thought himself as above people. A couple years ago, I went to the Super Bowl with a friend of ours, and out of a whim, I said, well, I'm going to email Archie and see if I can just stop and say hello. And within 24 hours, he responded and said, Eli, this is when Peyton was with the Colts, I think, and he goes, Eli and I are going to be pretty busy, but, maybe we can stop by. So he said, well, stop by the restaurant. He owns a place called Manning's. And he goes, stop by and just tell him I said, to buy you a drink and everything. No problems. He was great.
Fantastic.
But he didn't see himself above us, because obviously he needed the team more. But he was a great guy.
After that 75 season, your coach, John North, was let go, and Hank Stram comes in. He came in with a reputation in Kansas City. And did you see a change in kind of a focus from North to Stram?
Well, North was let go. Matter of fact, when North was let go, it was like the 8th or 9th game of the 75 season. And Ernie Hefferly, who was the director of player personnel, took over as the interim coach. And Ernie's really the one that was responsible for me getting to New Orleans. He called up, I was actually substitute teaching in Ellicottville, and called on the phone. He introduced himself. Of course, I didn't recognize the name, and he goes, how quickly can you be on a plane? And I said, what? He goes, I want you to come to New Orleans and help us out for the rest of the season. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. And so I went and I played the last 6 games. But he was responsible because he was a player personnel director, and he knew of my quote unquote reputation with the special teams. So
how did that happen? Were you traded by the Giants or released by the Giants?
I was released by the Giants.
So you're a free agent, basically, right? So you're released, and then midway during the season here, Hefferly gets a hold of you.
Right.
Wow. Were you surprised to get such a call, or had you gotten other calls?
No, I had talked to, and again, I can't think of his name. He was good friends with Louis Foy and Pat Carroll from Bonaventure. Anyway, he was with the Bears at the time, and they gave me a call, but it never turned into much. And then when Ernie called, they basically picked me up at the airport and said, hey, you're going to be here the rest of the season. We just want you to get comfortable. And pretty hard not to, though, in those days, because he was the interim coach, and when they were already 0-8, I believe. Yeah. And he goes, hey, you can't kick a dead horse. I used to leave for practice at like 8:30 in the morning. I'd be home by 10:30. I would stay and watch film occasionally, but that was it, 8:30 to 10:30.
So you really were just riding out the season.
Right. And one of my friends in college, John Laplace, who was the basketball manager, he was writing for the Times-Picayune. So when he saw that I got picked up, he called me on the phone. He goes, look, I got an extra bedroom. Why don't you stay with me? And I said, gee, that'd be great. Because we didn't plan on Patty and the family coming down. Well, he lived a block and a half from Bourbon Street. And that was an experience in itself.
So you became friends with Al Hurd and Pete Fountain?
A lot of good friends with those people. And dancers on the corner, little tap dancers on the corner, Pat O'Brien's. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
All right, that's what a thrill. It was also the first year the Superdome was open. What was that like playing there? I mean, that was a brand new experience where you're playing indoors.
Well, I didn't, again, when I got there, the Saints were 0-8, and I do recall we played Atlanta on my first game there. And something happened. I don't know whether Archie fumbled and they called it against us, or something happened that the crowd really disagreed with and went nuts. And in those days, they wouldn't stop the game. So, what's his name? Steve Bartkowski got up the line of scrimmage, and the fans delayed the game 15 minutes because you couldn't hear. I mean, literally, you and I could be sitting this close, and you couldn't hear anything. Wow. It's like a jet engine roaring in your ears. And they just stood there, and they just kept going like this, and the official goes, I'm not stopping it, because if we stop, they'll start again. And yeah, so 3 times that game, they held it up for about 40 minutes total. Wow. Something else.
That would be an experience, my gosh.
And running across the Superdome floor, there were boards, where the bleachers and things come out. They're actually boards that are underneath those things, so when you ran across, you could hear. And that was different. And the field was flat, which was also much different.
An AstroTurf.
Yeah, but it was flat. Yeah. Like outdoors, you had to crown it.
Right.
No, it was flat.
Was that tough on your legs?
AstroTurf was the worst thing ever invented. Now, the field turf they have now, there's this, it's still out there, whether that's really good or not. To me, grass was the best. Except for Washington, because by the end of the season they were spray painting the green so that it would look like grass, nothing but mud. And Philadelphia was the worst turf in the world. They actually had splits in the seam about 2 inches, and there's concrete underneath it. And that in Pittsburgh, about the same. It was horrible. And the Astrodome turf wasn't very good either. So
During that time period, were there teams that you said, "Oh man, I can't believe we got to play these guys this week"? You know, where they were just kind of a cut or two above the rest of the league that you just knew you were going to get bumped and bruised and beat up?
I would say that if I had to look back, probably only one time that I ever really feel that we had no chance. And that was versus the Raiders. And it must have been 75. When I was with the Saints, we went out there and, you know, they were big and physical and they just tore us a new one. I mean, I think halftime was 42-7. And middle linebacker comes in the huddle and he goes, "How many more are you guys going to give them back there?" And the strong safety said, "Well, we figure about 2 or 3 more, and then they'll be happy and they'll let up." But Marv Hubbard was on that team, and so he was kind enough the day before the game. We went out, had some dinner and a couple drinks, but they were pretty intimidating. But it's the only time I ever really felt that. And then we played Pittsburgh on a Monday night when I was with the 49ers. They were so much better than we were, and we knew it. And Jack Ham gave me one of the funniest lines that I sometimes use at speaking engagements. Afterwards, I went up and said, "Hammer," I said, "Damn." I said, "You guys seem to know where the ball was going every play." I said, "How'd you know that?" And he goes, "It's a guy that came out of the huddle with the tears in his eyes."
That's terrific.
Yeah. So even though we weren't, I didn't play football, I still maintained a lot of friendships with some of the old Franco and Jack Ham. And I mean, I obviously, my sophomore year in college, I firmly believe the best basketball team at Penn State was the football team.
Yeah.
Jack Ham was awesome athlete, super, and so was Franco.
Yeah.
So
We got away from a little bit from Hank Stram. Always curious. You saw him on TV later in life as a commentator, and just seemed like a feisty, fiery little guy, like a Napoleon.
yeah, he was, but he was also a player's coach. He would, if there's anybody you could trust or you needed anything, you just went to Hank and he'd say, "All right." Of course, I brown-nosed him a little bit because when I was growing up about 10, 11, 12 years old, I became a big American Football League fan. So I followed the Chiefs and the Broncos and, you know, way back in the early 60s. And so when we get on the bus, I'd always take the bus with Hank and I'd sit right behind him and I'd start talking about the old Chiefs. But he was a super guy. And we had training camp in Vero Beach, Florida. And my wife and kids came down, and Donnie Herman's wife and kids came down, and they stayed for about a week, you know, to get to the beach and everything. And we were going to play the Bears in Chicago in a preseason game. And Hank saw us standing there with the families. He comes over and he introduces himself. And so he said to the wives, he said, "What do you guys have planned while we're in Chicago?" And she goes, "Well, we thought we'd go up to Disney World." And he goes, "Oh, this is great." He goes, "Here." He said, "Give this lady a call in the morning, but don't leave until you talk to her." So they were going to leave 8 o'clock in the morning, so they called. This lady answers the phone. He had set up everything from tickets to hotel to everything.
Wow.
For the family for the 4 days we were going to be gone. And that's just a small thing that he would do. He always dressed real dapper, so we always really had the best, you know, outfits. And, you know, he was a big fan of the tearaway jersey, but he was a character. He'd always make sure that his shorts were shorter than everyone else so his legs would look longer, but it never worked.
During your 76 season, you drafted, because didn't have a lot of success, and so therefore drafted earlier, Chuck Muncie. What was he like when he came in? He seemed like a big stud of a guy.
Chuck Muncie was a typical, believe it or not, California kid. Much different than most of us, and Lord rest his soul, he was into some things that not a whole lot of us, I didn't understand. And eventually I do believe it was part of the reason that he's no longer with us, but he was fun. He and Tony Galbraith, when they came in, Galbraith was from Missouri. They used to call him Thunder and Lightning, and he always used to say, when we were scrimmaging, he told the whole defense, he goes, if depending on how the coaches are acting, he said, if I take my mask and go like this, he goes, buckle up, because they just told me either run over the damn guy or, so it was time to really buckle in. But yeah, he was an athlete for 6'5" and 250 or 240, whatever he was. But he was, unfortunately, got hooked into some things. He and a couple other running backs that, the other one ended up in prison. Yeah. So, but he, right to the end, I'm trying to think of who it was in California and ran into him. And he said, "Oh, make sure you tell Chuck Crist I said hello." Yeah. And but he died way too young.
Yeah. 77, you were the defensive MVP. The team, how did you get that recognition for the Saints? Did you?
I was pretty much the last one standing. No, no. I had a good season as far as, I can't remember, 4 or 5 sacks from the safety position. I think I had 5 or 6 interceptions. Led the team in tackles, which was not good when you're playing free safety. But I really did have probably my best year because I stayed healthy. Did have a separated shoulder late in the year, but you just played with those kind of things. But looking back, and again, I look now is, with all humility. Finally, this 2 years ago, we were in New York City, and finally, for the first time, it really hit me. We were there for a Giants reunion, and so the one morning we got to go to Kelly and Michael and meet Michael Strahan. So after the show, we went up and everything, and I shook hands with him and introduced myself, and I said, "Yeah, I'm an old timer." And he goes, no. He says, remember, the key word of that is timer, which means you did play, and you should never be ashamed of that. And so really, for the first time, I thought, I really did do some good things. Absolutely. And I really had some great experiences. But when I come around here, it's not that I don't like to talk about it. It's just that, gosh, I talk more about my high school days than I do the pro days. And, of course, a lot of people are very interested, and I appreciate that. But to me, I look at it as just another guy who got really lucky, in the right place at the right time in all aspects, from high school to college to the pros. Met a lot of great people, still have a lot of friends in the New York area. If you don't mind me, we lived in Parsippany, Lake Parsippany, my rookie year. So we used to carpool with Larry Jacobson and Pat Hughes and a bunch of us guys. And we used to stop at this deli every morning, and I used to get a cheeseburger, ham, and egg sub every morning. And it had to have been 25 maybe 30 years after. I said to Patty one time, we were coming back, I said, let's go to the deli, see if the guy's still there. Sure enough, walked in the door, and he goes, cheeseburger, ham, and eggs.
Kidding.
Yeah, oh, yeah. They don't forget, honest to goodness. And so the people in New York are really, really great. Not that the other fans weren't. It's just that New Orleans is a nice place to visit, but I didn't like living there. I mean, my son was in school, and he had kindergarten. He's 52 kids and one teacher.
Yeah.
So he ended up at Shores Academy. He didn't like that either.
To draw closure to your pro career, 77 is your last year with the Saints. What happened there between that and the 49ers?
New coach, Dick Nolan came in, and even though I was the starter in New Orleans, he wanted someone that would be able to sort of direct his four-man defense. I can't even remember what they called it now, but flex, I guess.
Flex, yeah.
Flex defense. And so he traded for Skip Vanderbunt, and I was on the other end of that. And I got to San Francisco, and it was a mess. I mean, they had fired Dan Radakovich walked out. He was a defensive coordinator. He walked out because the head coach, he said, was not doing things right. And then the head coach got fired. They put another guy in there, and they fired him. And then they put the running back coach back in as the head coach, and then he brought Bad Rad back as the defensive coordinator. Bad Rad's really the only one I ever really got along with out there, because first day of practice, he kind of looked at me and he goes, "Now, what are you doing back there?" And I said, "Well, a technique." And he goes, "I don't give a damn about technique." He goes, "Get your butt back in the hole and go to the ball like you did when you were playing basketball in college." So I think this was, I don't know, game 6 or 7 when he came back. I had 6 interceptions after that because he just said, just go to the ball. But it was a fun time. San Francisco is beautiful. And fortunately or unfortunately, one of my friends from the Saints, he got traded to Chicago, so he had a house in Cupertino. So he let my wife and I and the kids live in his house in Cupertino, and
Cool.
that's where I became close friends with Steve DeBerg. We carpooled every day, so got to know him and his family, and been friends ever since.
As you look back and you had an amazing athletic career, Chuck, on all fronts, and not everybody gets a chance to say they played in the NFL. And I agree with Michael Strahan. Sometimes they use the term, "Well, I'm a has-been." Well, the reality, it's better to be a has-been than a never was.
Yep.
It's the same concept. Is there a kind of a message? I mean, you're a kid from Salamanca that played in the NFL for 7 years or more. Fantastic. What's the message in all that?
Well, the message, and again, I try to talk to my grandkids, especially the 2 boys here, about, if you really want it, you got to work at it. You just have to work. You can't take what other people say about you or think about you. You're too small, or you kind of have to look in the mirror and say, that's really the only person that can change all of this. And so if you want it bad enough, you got to work at it. I was fortunate enough, like I said, to have people that gave umpteenth hours to developing, but I also did a lot of work on my own. And the key message for me when I was growing up till I met my wife when I was a senior and she was a sophomore was, you got to dare to be different. You can't go to the parties. You can't, you got to put more time into what your goals are, because in a lot of ways my goals were short term.
Yeah.
20, just over 28 years old, and everything that I had worked for, everything that I had stressed that I was going to do was over.
Yeah.
So what do you do now? So now you just try to pass along the message, again, to my family in particular, that it isn't easy. And I'm trying to convince my youngest grandson now that you got to be a small man in a big man's world and learn how to do that. Because if you learn how to do it and then you grow, so then you'll really be, hell to pay.
Yeah.
And it's the message if I talk to high school kids, some good kids that I met through here from Maple Grove, Alex Grace and the Secchi boys. It's not easy. And it's also not easy to be the person that stands out all the time. So you got to be careful of what you do, what you say, where you go. And my daughter was one of those that listened. I know there was a lot of times she'd sit upstairs crying because her friends were going to the party or the prom or whatever. She goes, I don't want any part of that. There's a world out there I want to see, and the only way I'm going to do that is if I set my goals and do whatever. So she was salutatorian of her class, went to college on a golf scholarship, came out of JMU with no debt, which was
amazing.
Great for her.
Yeah.
And my son the same. That's a whole other story. My son, most people know him, he was a great athlete in high school. And had he been, when I say healthy, he was born with his left foot 3 sizes smaller than his right foot, and it never corrected, even though we had surgery. And he was one heck of an athlete. If he had 2 normal feet, I know he would have been a basketball player even beyond college. As it was, he was the punter on the football team at Alfred, and played on the basketball team, and was number 1 on the golf team, so can't be all bad and he never looked at it as a handicap. He always looked at it as, hey, and neither did his friend. It's just the way it is. They won a lot of bets saying he'd put his right foot up there, and they say, I'll bet you a drink that we can make his left foot smaller. And then he put the left foot up there. But no, he's a good kid, and both my kids. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the lady that's sitting in the other room. Without her, I mean, we've been married now 45, almost 46 years. And 2 years prior to that, we were together. But it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have finished college. I really was sinking fast when it came to academics, and I didn't really care much. That's end of my sophomore year. And so she's really been they say behind every man there's one. Well, she's the one. She did everything for me and continues to do so. It's my caregiver and keeps track of everything for me. She is still trying to make me wear her glasses so I see things more her way, but I won't do it.
Good luck.
Yeah.
You look great, Chuck. I know that you've had quite a struggle health-wise, but you look great today.
I felt the best I have in 16 months. Scheduled to have a procedure at the end of March, beginning of February, that hopefully will rid my body of all of this problem, and we'll see how it goes. If 2015 wasn't very much fun, but I'm looking forward to 2016 and beyond, and maybe I'll swing a golf club again. You never know.
That's terrific. What's the question I should have asked you that I didn't? What am I missing?
Well, actually, I don't know if it's something that you're missing, but the 2 things that I really enjoyed most after I finished playing football was golf and softball, fast pitch softball. Yeah. I played with Minnie Barr and Olean, but we became really close friends with Ron Fretters, who was here, and Jim Adamczak, some of the older fast pitch softball players. We had a great time doing that. And then in the 90s, I got hooked into golf. Unfortunately, if you get hooked into golf, you got to make sure your wife doesn't. She got hooked in, and she didn't cook for 77 straight days because she's playing golf. But I lost a lot of weight. So
Was when you were at Oleander, was Tommy Irons pitching then?
Yes, Tommy Irons, Wayne Dornsife, Seth Halftown in Salamanca. We played all around the Buffalo, Pennsylvania area. The question that people don't know, well, the thing that most people don't know is that, oh gosh, I don't know if I dare say this.
Oh, what the heck? You might as well.
My last credits at Penn State, I was doing my student teaching, and everything was going well. I was having a lot of fun with the student teaching, and like 2 weeks before graduation, and 2 weeks before I was supposed to go with the Giants, my advisor calls me in and he goes, "You're lacking one science course. I don't know how we missed it." And I said, "We only got 2 weeks. What am I going to do?" And he goes, "I don't know." So I talking to some of my friends in the basketball team, and one of the managers says, "Don't worry about it." So he went and left, called me back, and he goes, "Go see Professor Jones." All right. So I went to see Professor Jones, and he goes, "I can't believe after all this time at this university that people can't do something for you."
Yeah.
He goes, pulls out a syllabus, and he goes, "There it is right there. Cattle Judging 101. He goes, "How many legs on a cow?" I said, 4, and he goes, "B, you're done."
That's a great story.
Yeah, but I don't know. There's so many people that I probably haven't mentioned that I could. From Joe Oliverio, Lou Foy, Joe San Filippo, Dick Watchter, all the way through. Again, I just thank God every day that those people spent time and willing, and I believe there's people out there like that. But in today's day and age, with so many sports, the facilities, I mean, we had that facility every night for 6 straight nights for 3 hours. Well, how bad can it be?
Yeah, that's terrific. How tough was Jim Adams' act to hit against?
Well, I'm going to brag a little bit now. Now I'm going to put away my humble shoes.
Yeah.
I was 16 years old at Salamanca, and Koopy Krantz called me on the phone with Dave Andrews, who played with the minibar.
Yeah.
And of course, they had watched me play baseball and things. They said, "We're going to a tournament in Jamestown, and we'd like you to come along." I said, "I'm only 16. He said, "That doesn't matter." He says, "You're capable enough." So I went and we played one game in the morning on a Saturday. Then we got to face Adamsack. My first time up against Jim Adamsack, I hit a home run over the scoreboard.
Oh, yeah.
Up at the old softball field, and we won 1-0.
Oh, wow. Brag. That's worthy of bragging about.
And so I know afterwards, Dave and Koopy were talking to Jim, and he said, "Who is that little runt anyway?" I mean, at that time I was more like 6 foot tall, but that was one of my best feelings. And of course, got to know each other the more we played against each other. And then Jim was a member at Elkdale for years, golfing. So he used to play a lot of golf with he and Joe Gongle, and a lot of good friends.
He was tough. I mean, in my world, I grew up in Jamestown, and I watched the fast pitch, played a little bit, but watched it, and it was clearly Jim Adams, Atkins, Stravatos, that older group, and then there were the young bucks, Caesar House.
Yep.
I mean, those are the guys, ultimately, they play around and then clash.
Right.
And that's the game everybody in Jamestown went to see.
Right.
And inevitably, you would have the Labor Day tournament at Jamestown, where everybody came, and that's the Dornsifes and the Tommy Irons, and all you guys would come. And that was magic. That was just hugely magic for us.
That first year that I played, again, I got to know more of them later, but Tommy Irons, I never really saw him. I never really saw much fast pitch softball. Salamanca had a league, but it wasn't fast pitched like it is here. And Tommy Irons, we got in the losers bracket and pitched 7 games in 2 days.
Yeah.
2 on Saturday and 5 on Sunday. We're still going strong.
Okay.
So that was a fun time. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore, and most of the guys are gone, but I hope not to be one of them.
No, well, this has been terrific, Chuck. I really can't thank you enough.
Well, no, thank you. Thanks for thinking of me, and I look forward to seeing you on the Supreme Court.